Hello, everyone, and welcome. Welcome from my side to the MSM Annual Conference, which was organized by SDA Bocconi School of Management, and in particular, the Master in Sustainability Management and ECCO think tank and Agora Verkehrswende. Thank you so much for being here with us on campus today in Milan, and thank you for the many connected from any part of the world I saw. My name is Valentina Mardegan. I am part of the recruiting and admissions team here, specifically dedicated to our Master in Sustainability Management, and I have the privilege to introduce today's session and today's event to you. So, what are we going to have today? We are going to listen to a presentation and a welcome speech from the Associate Dean from SDA Bocconi, Professor Enzo Baglieri. And then we are going to listen to two panels. The first one is going to be moderated by Professor Matteo Di Castelnuovo, the MSM Program Director. And the second one, after our coffee break, will be moderated by Mr. Giulio Piovaccari from Reuters News Agency. After that, we are going to listen to a closing speech from Professor Francesco Perrini, who is the Associate Dean for Sustainability here at SDA Bocconi, and a Q&A session, which is going then to lead us to our networking aperitivo here for those of you who are on campus today. For those of you who are connected, feel free also to type your questions in the live chat that you have there. I will see them, and we will be sure to answer them all at the end of the event. So now, without further ado, I will actually introduce our Enzo Baglieri, Associate Dean at SDA Bocconi, Professor of Technology, Innovation and Operation Management. Thank you.
Thank you, Valentina. Thank you, Valentina, and welcome everyone. We have, let's say, people here in the classroom, 50 of us who, against all odds and with the complexity of the logistics in Milan and the weather, joined the event, plus more than 100 connected online. In the age of intangible and immaterial events, by definition, are 100% hybridized. Well, a couple of words just for you to better understand what the Bocconi is and why the first annual conference of the Master in Sustainability Management focus on the future of mobility and in particular the automotive sector in the European Union. The Bocconi School of Management, as you all know, is the School of Management of Bocconi University. Bocconi University is, say, a private university in the landscape of the educational system in Italy, focused 100% on economics and management. Our school was founded 53 years ago. It was the first Italian business school in terms of foundation and one of the first in Europe, promoting and diffusing higher education, post-experience education dedicated to executives and managers. The initial mission and values of the school were to contribute to the growth of the managerial competence of our entrepreneurial, let's say, people and to the executives working in our companies. In the last 50 years, the school grew a lot. According to the Financial Times, we are ranking now third in the world for our full-time MBA, and in general, we are now playing this role of, let's say, being a global leader in higher education. But the essence of our education in management, comes from the fact that this school is still investing and preserving a lot the core of our essence, of being a cultural institution, that is to do research and to focus on the most challenging and promising topics that can inspire and influence the managerial practices. Over the last 20 years, one of the key topics we have investigated has been sustainability. Originally it was called, maybe some of you remember, like me, 20 years ago we were talking about green management, then environmental management. Today everything is under the great framework of the ESG and sustainability in general, and this has created on the one hand a body of knowledge And on the other hand, a faculty, a group of professors, super skilled and I must say also very well known in the international context on the management, on the, let's say, the management of the sustainability in a broad sense, most of all in terms of impact on what management really may mean and what business, how business is influenced by the policies for and practices for sustainability. At the end of this long process, a couple of years ago, most of all I must thank Matteo Di Castelnuovo, who is going then to chair the first round table. We made the decision of making, let's say, of making much more visible and concrete this dedication we had over the last 20 years on sustainability, and we have launched this Master in Sustainability that is going management, which is going to officially being kick off in March 2025. But once again, to better explain and to clearly position the fact that our contents and our skills in terms of classes comes from research, we, Matteo, a few months ago made the decision, and I must thank our partner and most of all ECCO think tank, we made the decision of focusing at least this first event on one of the key areas of focus of the all Master in Sustainability Management, which is, let's say, mobility in general. So that's why you are now officially hosted by the Master Division, that is the division, the portfolio of programs I have the responsibility to lead. And I'm, let's say, welcoming you here today on behalf of the Dean of the School, Professor Stefano Caselli. In the second round, I'll be sitting down here as an expert, or a presumed expert of mobility and the automotive sector. So you'll see me back in an hour more or less, but I leave the stage now to Valentina, who is, let's say, taking the responsibility of introducing this initial part of the afternoon. Enjoy the event, enjoy the conference, enjoy the contents, and we'll have time for those who are in presence then to discuss and talk later at the very end also with our networking cocktail. That for those who are connected, it's important to know that every event at Bocconi at the very end has a networking cocktail. So I suggest you next time to take a flight and to come to Milan. See you later.
Thank you. Thank you, Enzo. I'd like now to welcome on stage Matteo Leonardi, Executive Director at ECCO think tank. And we also have connected Christian Hochfeld, Director Executive at Agora Verkehrswende. So, Matteo, please. Thank you.
Hello, good afternoon, everybody. I am Matteo Leonardi. I am the co-founder and executive director of ECCO. ECCO, it is the first and possibly the only Italian independent think tank dedicated to climate change. Now that everybody talks about climate change and everybody is in the climate change debate, we believe it was important to have an organization, which is ECCO, our think tank, that speaks about this transition from an independent point of view. And we are independent in the sense that our mission is to support this transition without relying on financial economic resources from the private entities. So we uniquely work with financial resources coming from the philanthropy. This allowed us to create the spaces to talk about the transition from an independent point of view from a public interest point of view. Having said that, just as an introduction of myself and the organization that I have contributed to start up, we are here today because we thought a few months ago that it was important to create a space to talk about one of a key policy approach to deliver decarbonization, which is technology neutrality. It is a policy approach. And we believe it was important to create a space, and let me say a protected space, because this is in the spirit of our organization, that this transition is not easy to be delivered, and therefore it is necessary to create spaces for dialogue, and is to create spaces to understand which policy mechanism, which policies more effectively is able to deliver a difficult task. Why it is important and why did we select the technology neutrality? I think that now that the decarbonization process has reached a lot of segments of the society, just the industrial issues, the social issues, the infrastructural issues, the financial issues. Now that the decarbonization has reached all this level, I think it is the time to assess if a pricing mechanism, such as the technology neutrality approach implies as a policy response to be implemented, it is an effective way to deliver decarbonization. And the experience that we have on the ground, now that decarbonization has reached this level of transition, it is possibly not. So all those prices mechanisms and all those technology neutrality policy mechanisms, they need to be complemented because the effect of decarbonization needs to be complemented in the social dimension, in the industrial dimension, even in sectors where technology neutrality approach and carbon pricing has worked effectively, such as in the electricity market. If we see the electricity market, now we are talking about capacity mechanism to complement carbon pricing mechanism. We are talking about social policies to deliver a social just transition. We are talking about an issue that has been forgotten about the industrial capacity to create the technologies to deliver this transition. We are talking about security issues that a pricing mechanism is not enough to deliver in this transition. And now that, as I said, decarbonization has reached a lot of level, out of which the global trade one is a key one, it is possibly the time to reconsider how effective it is to talk about technology neutrality as an adequate public policy to deliver the target. It is important also because I think that the infrastructural issue needs to be reconsidered and the words needs to be rephrased. We are not talking about public support. We should not talking about public support or subsidies when we are talking about which infrastructure we want to develop in the next days to support the transition. To create an electricity infrastructure able to absorb the renewable production, able to deliver renewable energies to final consumers, able to integrate the storage system, able to connect the distribution of loads coming from the electric mobility, coming from heat pumps. It is not a subsidy. It is a public investment in infrastructure. And this is an important point to take into consideration in this global issue of decarbonization. And the last point, because why we think it is important now to talk about technology neutrality, is because undeniably this policy approach is being used to dismantle some of the key points of the Green Deal, which are necessarily based on policies approach that cannot be delivered with carbon pricing mechanism. And one of these key points is the regulation of the e-vehicles with a deadline of 2035. So this is it. This is ECCO, and this is the reason why we selected this issue to be discussed today, together with the partners of Bocconi University and together with our partners of Agora. What is the aim of the day? Well, I think the aim of the day is to clean the ground about the technology neutrality, to clean the ground about the use of this policy principle, just as I said, to dismantle the decarbonization approach, a policy approach driven by the EU, without being able to deliver a technology which is in fact able to deliver decarbonization as much as the electric vehicles are. So we are starting, and today we are talking about the mobility and the issue of neutral technology in the mobility sector, but it is a wider, it is just an example for a wider assessment of this principle in the whole decarbonization strategy that we want to have. Thank you very much, and thank you for the organization of that. I just leave the ground.
Thank you.
Back to you. Bye.
Thank you. Thank you so much. We can now open the connection with Christian Hochfeld, as mentioned before, Executive Director at Agora Verkehrswende.
Thank you very much, and salve, da Berlino. Thank you, Professor Baglieri. Thank you, Matteo, for the kind words of introduction and also setting the scenes. And honorable guests and distinguished colleagues, dear students, it's my great pleasure and my honor to speak here as the director of Agora Verkehrswende, one of the partners of this event, to you, and welcome you for, I think, a very important discussion. And I first of all have to hope that you accept my apologies for not being with you today, because there's a saying in Germany, if the automotive industry in Germany has a mild cold, Germany has pneumonia. And so I'm one of the 10 million currently who has not, hopefully not pneumonia, but unfortunately have a flu. So I was not able to fly with the flu. That's also sounds nice, but it's not nice. So I have to do it here from home, from Berlin. But I would love to point it out that I would do anything to be there next time, or hopefully find another opportunity to be with you in Milano, to be with you in Milan, because I think what has been already pointed out by Matteo, that this important question of the conference today, the conference Technology Neutrality and the European Green Deal, Solutions for a Competitive Automotive Industry Sector, is not a case where Germany and Italy compete as we did in the past in Formula One, between Ferrari and Mercedes, potentially, but it's something, especially now at the eve of a new European Commission and the eve of a new EU legislative period, where we have to cooperate and see that we align our strategies and our pathways forward to make this possible, to combine the climate targets together with the industrial targets, which we all share. So we are navigating through what I learned is nowadays called VUCA world, a world full of volatility, uncertainty, complexity, and ambiguity. But what we need is a totally different VUCA world for decarbonize the transport sector, and doing this with a healthy and competitive automotive industry. We need the clear vision for that we have to achieve the climate targets on the European level by 2050. Germany aims for climate neutrality by 2045. And this is only possible if we are decarbonizing the transport sector in the same period of time. That means that in 20 years from today, everything what will have to do with mobility and transport in Germany has to be decarbonized. And there's a clear understanding, that's for what the U stands for, instead of uncertainty, that these climate targets in the transport sector need absolutely fast ramp up of electric mobility and the electrification of the road sector. And this is only possible if we are able to do this with a healthy and competitive automotive sector. So should be no complexity, or despite complexity, we should have clarity. Clarity for the investment and planning for the automotive industry, and clarity that it was never be as cheap as today to achieve the climate targets. So whatever we are not able to mitigate today in the field of climate change, it will be more expensive to do this in the future. So in this sense, I think to act now and to act very, let's say, timely is an absolutely necessity to keep our movement and keep the policies and the climate neutrality in time. And what we do now need is to come to activity. And currently, I think when we started to plan this conference a couple of months ago, I think we would have not thought that we are in this situation where we are at the moment, that, you know, not only in Germany, but also in other parts of Europe, there is a European automotive industry which is in, I would say, trouble if it comes to the question how to come through this transition, meeting the climate targets, but also surviving in the global competition and surviving with good margins. So, as Matteo pointed out, and here I will close my welcome, I think now the question is, we are at the watershed saying, will we go technology specific forward to ramp up electric mobility as soon as possible? And this is not only part of the European Green Deal, but also part of the EU Clean Industrial Deal to come? Or will we open now the floor for saying the regulatory framework of technology neutrality will lead us to meeting our climate targets and meeting also the needs of a competitive and successful automotive industry? I'm very happy that we have the ability now to discuss this in this, you know, one of the top universities with regard to economics in Europe, because I think that this is not only a question for the theory and for the universities, but also bringing people from the practice, from the automotive industry, but also from the policymakers together to discuss this openly. What is the best way forward to meet our climate and industrial targets at the same time? And I'm very much looking forward to this conference. I would love to thank our partners at ECCO in Italy. I think this was very, very inspiring in the last months to discuss this between Italy and Germany. Thank you very much also to the partners at Bocconi University. And thank you all who made it to Milano. And when you will have a network cocktail tonight, I will maybe have a cough cocktail, hopefully getting better in the next days, and looking very much forward to meeting you all in the near future and participate in this discussion more lively. A warm welcome once again, and greetings from Berlin. I wish this conference great success and interesting talks.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Christian. We wish you also all the best and gute Besserung in German. So for our first keynote speech, we were supposed to have Ms. Beatrice Jordi, Director, Carbon Markets and Clean Mobility at the European Commission, but she had, unfortunately, a last-minute impediment. We have, instead, Baptiste Légué, Deputy Head of Unit for the Road Mobility DG Climate Action at the EU Commission Connected. Hello and welcome.
Yes, good afternoon. I hope you can hear me okay. And I will give you a short background explanation of where we are with the transition to zero-emission mobility from the point of view of the European Commission, so speaking from Brussels. And I would like to start by thanking the organizers, and in particular ECCO, for the opportunity to speak today and to convey the apologies of Beatrice Jordi, who, as you said, would not be able to participate today. So to try and explain a little bit where we stand from the European Commission's point of view and the progress that we have made in the EU as regards this transition to zero-emission mobility, I will recap a little bit what progress has been made in the past mandate, also looking at the global trends, which have already been mentioned a little bit by the previous speakers, and try to give a bit of an outlook of how things could progress in the upcoming mandate, which is about to start. So maybe to say that so far the EU climate policy it has been quite a success. We have managed to decarbonize our energy and our climate system by reducing our emissions by around 37% compared to the reference year of 1990. And this has not been at the expense of our growth, as the GDP over the same period has grown by more than 70%. So it is possible to decouple the emissions from the success of our economy. And this is something that is also linked to a certain extent to our dependency of fossil fuels, because decarbonization is a lot about getting rid of our addiction to fossil fuels and the several hundreds of billions of euros that we spend on a yearly basis to buy fuels, basically. So it is something that is that has been so far going hand in hand with economic growth. And this is very much the spirit for the future as well, that we will manage to continue to have this decarbonization going hand in hand with the industrial aspects of the transition. And as was pointed out in the recent report by Mr. Draghi, I think that this is something that should really go hand in hand, and that the objective for 2050 is that we manage to decarbonize our economy, but also that we have a thriving industry that can underpin this transition and can come out stronger from the transformation. So I will give, of course, the example focusing on the mobility sector, but I would like to restate a little bit where we are from a more general point of view as regards the climate objectives that we have set. At the EU level, it has been now enshrined in what is called the climate law that was proposed in 2021, that the objective is to reach climate neutrality by 2050. And we have a number of milestones on the way. And one of them is that by 2030, we want to have reduced our emissions by at least 55% compared to the reference emissions of 1990. So this is something that, of course, is massive in terms of transformation of all the sectors of the economy. And there I insist that, of course, all the sectors have to participate, and that the transport sector as well needs to participate. It is a sector which, compared to the others, has reduced its emissions less. I mean, and that's a euphemism, because the transport sector is actually the only sector that has higher emissions right now than in 1990 by around 20%. So it is really important that action really proceeds swiftly in this sector if we are to reach the climate neutrality goal. In this context, in 2021 to 2023, we negotiated at the EU level what was called the Fit for 55 package of legislation, which basically was an overhaul of all the climate-related legislation at the EU level in order to make sure that all our policies were in line with this ambition of reducing the emissions by 55% by 2030. And this included comprehensive package of legislative revisions in relation to the transport sector, and in particular in relation to road transport. The cornerstone of these legislative acts was the revision of the regulations on the CO2 standards, both for the cars and vans and also for the heavy-duty vehicles, that is for the lorries and for the buses. And these regulations were already existed in the past, and there were a number of targets that were not changed during this last revision. For instance, the target that will apply as of 2025 for cars and vans to reduce their emissions by 15% compared to the 2019 reference emissions has not been changed, and it was already in the regulation since 2019. So what is new in this revision is the longer-term direction of travel that has been set very clearly, and in particular for the cars and vans, the decision that has been taken at the EU level is to go for a 100% reduction by 2035. So it basically means that all the new cars and vans that will be put on the market by 2035 will have to be zero emission. And this is something that is, of course, very, very meaningful. And you were mentioning, and I know that this is very much the topic of your conference today, the question of technology neutrality. I think it's important to flag that since the beginning, these regulations on the CO2 standards have been technology neutral at the tailpipe, which means that what is important, and from a climate perspective, is that the vehicles have no emissions. So zero emission at the tailpipe is what we are looking for, and it is done in a technology neutral way, meaning that it can be electric vehicles, it can be hydrogen-powered vehicles, or other kinds of technologies. We leave the manufacturers free to deliver the zero-emission vehicles using the technology that they choose. This is, well, and I think it's important to say also that de facto what we are seeing is that the main traction is towards electromobility, but again, the concept in the regulation is that it is technology neutral at the tailpipe. And also it has been announced in the political guidelines for the upcoming mandate that we would extend this technology neutrality principle and that we would look at the role of e-fuels in the context of this regulation through a targeted amendment of the regulation as part of the foreseen review, which is scheduled for 2026. So this is the way that technology neutrality is applied. The regulation works on the basis of fleet-based targets. So each manufacturer has to ensure that on average, all the vehicles that they put on the market will have a sufficient emission reduction compared to the reference year of 2019. And there are also a number of flexibilities that allow the manufacturers to achieve these reductions in a way that is as cost efficient as possible. So for instance, benefiting from eco-innovation schemes or pooling with other manufacturers to jointly reach the targets. And this is a regulation that has many benefits. I mean, of course, there are the environmental benefits in terms of CO2 reduction and also air quality and health aspects, but also it is a regulation that brings a very clear direction of travel and predictability and visibility for the industry. And this is critical in terms of driving the investments towards clean tech, towards also upskilling and reskilling of the workforce, for instance, towards research and innovation. So it is very important to have this predictability, and the industry keeps telling us that this stability is something that is very, very critical in this spirit. And the regulation also brings significant savings, meaning that through electricity, in particular powered vehicles, the price is much lower and the efficiency is much greater. So that saves a lot of fossil fuels and a lot of money at the end of the day. This is, I spent a bit of time describing this regulation because it is really the cornerstone, but it is part, as I was saying, of a comprehensive framework of regulations and directives that ensure that all the enabling framework is there so that this transition to electromobility can happen. And I would mention, for instance, the AFIR, the Alternative Fuels for Infrastructure Regulation, which basically mandates the member states to deploy a network of recharging or refueling points so that the zero-emission vehicles can be recharged or refueled. And we can see at this stage that progress is going really well, and that nearly all member states are above their infrastructure deployment targets at this stage. There are also other elements that have been put in that have been adopted by the Commission and by the EU, including the Critical Raw Materials Act, which helps ensure the safe and sustainable supply of critical raw materials. Also, the Net Zero Industry Act to simplify the procedures, and state aid as well, so that the industry can also perform in a smoother way. I could also mention all the support that is given to the research activities as regards, for instance, batteries, and so a whole framework of support and enabling legislation has been put in place at the EU level. So this is where we are at this stage. But of course, I mean, this is not something that comes overnight or that is easy to achieve. And we know that there are difficulties. We know that there will be challenges along the way, also a lot of opportunities, and we need to continue having a very sustained dialogue with the industry and the other stakeholders to ensure that we can collectively deliver on all these objectives. So that's a little bit where we are at the EU level at this stage. I will say a few words on the global market trends, because I think it's important to take also a step back, that this is not something that the EU is doing in isolation. And at this stage, the International Energy Agency considers that by 2024, so this year, around 1 out of 5, so meaning more than 20% of the cars who will be put on the market globally will be electric vehicles. And the estimate from the same International Energy Agency is that by 2035, we will reach 50%, so more than 1 out of 2 cars will be electric around the world. So this is something that is indeed going fast and accelerating, as we can see it. In China, more than half of the vehicles put on the market are already electric vehicles. We can see that there are regulations or legislation in the US, in the UK, in Australia that go in that direction. We can see that emerging economies are also going in that direction in the global south. So this is really something that is a mega trend, and for which it is important for the EU industry to also seize the opportunity that this trend means at the EU level. Of course, the EU has significant comparative and competitive advantages. It is a strong automotive industry that we have, and it is well placed in this competition. But we know that it is going to be very competitive. But this trend is happening, and it is going to be very important for the EU economy and for the EU automotive sector to be really on board, especially as the automotive sector is more than 6% of our GDP at the moment. So this is a very significant sector for the EU economy. It drives directly or indirectly more than 13 million jobs at the EU level. So it is going to be of tremendous importance to ensure that the decarbonization and the industrial transition can also go hand in hand. So it comes, as I was saying, with some challenges, but also some opportunities, and we need to continue to work on both. I will say just a few words on where we are headed for the upcoming mandate with the new team of commissioners that is about to take office towards the end of this year. Really, the question of industrialization and ensuring that the transition towards, well, green and also digital transitions can happen in harmony. It is very important, of course, this green transition, but also the digitalization aspect is another transformation that is fundamental in the automotive industry. So all these things will have to go hand in hand. The Commission has already indicated that it would adopt a clean industrial deal, which has also been mentioned by the previous speakers, in the first 100 days of the mandate. And the expectation is that this will shape the way we will work on this industrialization for the coming years, also leading to an industrial accelerator act that will also create conditions for this to happen. And more specifically for the automotive sector, the plan is that the Commission will work on an automotive industrial plan, which will be also a more tailored response to the questions in this specific sector. So we will clearly, for all that, need to continue dialogue with all the stakeholders, and in particular with the industry. It is going to be important to ensure that we continue to have a stable framework, and that we give the predictability and the direction of travel, and that we ensure that all the enabling framework conditions are present, from the availability of infrastructure to recharge, the connections to the electricity grid, also that the skills follow suit, that the critical raw materials can be present, that cars are increasingly affordable. It is indeed a full-fledged transformation, but there is really a commitment that the decarbonization and the industry transition will go hand in hand. So I hope that this was a useful introduction to your discussions. And yeah, I wish you a very fruitful conference today.
Thank you so much. Let's now move to the conference paper presentation with Massimiliano Bienati, who is Head of Transport Program at ECCO think tank. Welcome.
Thank you. Well, good morning and thank you. I just take few minutes to tell how and when this project started to take shape. Then I will leave the floor to Carlo that will present the paper. That's the main thesis of the paper we prepared. I just want to say that maybe director forgets or doesn't have clear the dimension of time. They said we started a couple of months ago to talk and thinking about this project. This project, the first idea about this is in 2022, when EU discussion on the regulation on CO2 standard and the 2035 ban of combustion engines started to heat up, and so started to heat up the public debate as well. So in this we started realizing that there was a kind of distortion of the reality when talking about technology neutrality in the debate, specifically in connection to climate mitigation, decarbonization of transport, competitive transformation of the automotive sector in a world that is changing its paradigm for the energy consumption, production and transition, and consumption, sorry. So to make a long story short, after several months of research and discussion with different stakeholders, including Agora and including Bocconi with Professor Di Castelnuovo, that I thank very much for that, we presented him this project, this idea of a conference, and thank you for having accepted the challenge. We are very glad and very grateful for this. So we worked in partnership with Agora, as I said, and after a long process of confrontation and discussion, we just came here today. As in every project that's work, something is missing, and today is missing our paper. Is ready, has been finalized and sent to Bocconi for peer review. Peer review are still ongoing, but there has been already a discussion, and the paper will be ready in the next days and will be published in our website. So in closing, please let me thanks once again SDA Bocconi, Dean Baglieri, for the hospitality, and all people that I don't mention here, but that's made possible this event to happen. Thank you very much. And
now, please welcome on the stage Karl Friedrich Elmer, who is Senior Economist at Agora Verkehrswende. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Max, for the kind introduction. And I also want to thank everyone for inviting us and for having the honor to speaking here. I have to make an apology upfront. So I was talked as we are lagging behind time to cut my presentation, and so I will skip a few slides to try to make up at least a few minutes we are lagging so far. So I think, sorry. So generally, my talk should give an introduction to the first panel, which is following subsequently, and it should provide some background and some thesis for the subsequent discussions. So I think, as we have heard before, there's consensus that we need to transition to zero-emission mobility, but there are some discussions on what are the right means for that. So sometimes also on the time scale, but mainly on the suitable policy instruments. And one key question, as already mentioned by Matteo Leonardi, was to which extent the market should decide alone which way to go, or which role the state should take in actively steering the technology choice. And a particular focus today and in my speech will be on the role of CO2 standards, and also briefly touching upon possible reform options in the upcoming review. So it will be structured in a, I would say, a rather abstract theoretical part discussing technology neutrality versus technology specificity, and whether technology openness is the same as technology neutrality. And then we will go through some of the barriers. I will cut this part, why technology neutrality might not be the right way to go. And then finally, a brief discussion, as I said, on the reform options for the review that is planned for 2026 or may potentially take place even earlier. Gratefully, the colleague from the EU Commission already mentioned most of these figures, so I will go through them. It's the share of transport emissions in overall EU emissions, but mostly the things were already said, so that the transport sector is the only one with growing emissions and its share. Maybe a brief note on the share of cars in overall transport emissions. So road transport makes up 75%, or roughly a bit less, a quarter of overall transport emissions, and among these, 60% come from cars. So the car regulation is the focus today. Then there are a few numbers on the targets, but they were mentioned already, so I can go through those. The same applies for the economic importance of the automotive industry that were already mentioned in the previous presentation. So it's always lagging a bit behind. The dynamic towards electric mobility was also mentioned, so I'm really grateful from my colleague from the European Commission, who helps me saving some time. And so then in the end, we might actually be quicker than planned in the schedule. So let's start with some theoretical considerations. It's now somehow abstract, but maybe interesting for particularly some of the students. So there's often the discussion, should we go technology neutral or should we go technology specific? And is technology neutrality the same as technology openness? So technology neutrality, I think most know, we regulate on the level of the overall objective of the regulation. We're talking about climate policy, that means greenhouse gas emissions. So we set greenhouse gas emission targets, or we set a price on greenhouse gas emissions, and then the market should decide what's the best way to go. So we allegedly have incentives for innovation, for searching for the best options, changing behavior, and taking the most cost-effective, the cheapest way to abate some emissions. So that's based on the assumption that we will leverage the decentralized knowledge of the market and of the market actors. But to work perfectly as it is in the textbook in Econ 101, we have some very restrictive assumptions. So first, the market has to work non-distorted, and we have fully informed and rational actors. Based on that assumption, technology neutrality, that is, for instance, carbon trading, will bring about the first best results. But, and going to the next slide, there might be instances in which first, it might not be possible for political reasons or for practical reasons to regulate on the level of the overall target, that is reducing greenhouse gas emissions. For instance, there's political resistance against pricing as a sole mean because that will drive up prices. There might be other instances where there are practical problems. That's not the case for greenhouse gases, or for some maybe, but for carbon dioxide, which is the main greenhouse gas, it's relatively easy. But there might also be considerations that it doesn't bring about the most cost-effective result. And we'll go to some of those reasons of the barriers that might lead to technology neutrality not being efficient as a sole instrument, but warranting some technology-specific instruments. And finally, to go to the last definition, is technology neutrality the same as technology openness? So, of course, there's not a universally agreed upon definition, but we make a clear distinction. Technology neutrality and technology specificity are characteristics of the regulation. That means we regulate either only the greenhouse gas, or we do favor some technologies directly or indirectly, so like with mandates, specific support, or also I would disagree to some extent with the European Commission with CO2 standards, because as was said, they are technology neutral on the level of the tailpipe, but they're not neutral on the level of overall GHG impacts, because we don't look at the GHG emissions that occurred during the generation of electricity. So that's not a critic, that's just telling that from this perspective or from this definition, I wouldn't agree that giving that the overall target is greenhouse gas emissions reduction, that the CO2 standards are technology neutral. So what means now technology openness? Technology openness means that the different technologies compete on a true level playing field. That is, all costs, all benefits are considered. But if there are pre-existing distortions or some barriers to a fair competition, for instance, that we have past dependencies, or we will come to some others, that lead to a distortion in the competition, then technology neutrality won't bring about the first best results, because when we have a neutral a referee that's adhering to the rules of football, let's say, but the pitch is not even, but the ball is rolling to one goal, then it's not fair even if you have a good referee. So to show it graphically, it's always a bit late. I will skip this because I mainly talked about it in the interest of time. Let's look at this graph. If we have a real undistorted playing field, so that is the left part with low, the right part with high technological openness before regulation, that means hardly any distortions, then it's true, technology neutral regulation will bring about efficient results. But if we don't have that technology open decision field before we start to regulate greenhouse gas emissions, then technology neutrality, as just tried to explain, doesn't bring about the most efficient results, but we need technology-specific additional instruments to counter those distortions and try to level them and try to create a true level playing field where the technologies really compete on a fair basis, and to compensate for some drawbacks they have in the beginning when the race starts for the best solution. So, as was said before already, if we look at at climate policy, the prototypical climate neutral instrument is pricing the greenhouse gas emissions. So carbon pricing, either by taxes, or if we have a given target by emissions trading, would price CO2 for each source at the same price. So then, in theory, without those distortions, that would bring about the first best results. So we would innovate to find and foster the best technologies and use the most cost-efficient abatement levers. But now let's look what are potential market imperfections that hinder carbon pricing to bring about the first best results. So I will skip through this faster than I planned. So basically, let's look at three potential barriers, three potential market imperfections for carbon pricing to work effectively. So the first is technology spillovers or knowledge spillovers. This is not unique, of course, for EVs, but new technologies, if they are developed, they bring along higher societal benefits than private benefits. So the innovator cannot patent all of the knowledge created. It will spill over to competitors, sometimes also to other branches. That applies to the technology development itself, R&D, but it also applies to production processes, so that you reduce waste, that you improve your production processes to be more efficient. And so there's a rationale for fostering this technological improvement, advancement, because it brings about higher benefits to the entire society. But why focus particularly on the transition to electric vehicles? So the only economist I mentioned on those slides is Acemoglu, because he received the Nobel laureate just recently. And as he states, there are particularly large spillovers for green technologies, larger than for other branches and other industries. So there's a rationale to spur those spillovers and give particular support for innovative green technologies like EVs, which are not there anymore for the combustion engine. So that's very major. There are hardly any more spillovers to be reaped. I will skip now the learning by using, that is on the demand side, that I will just briefly mention it, that users get to know the technology, know their reliability, how to use it. There's also a positive externality related to this. But what we take away is there will be underinvestment because the innovator can only reap part of the entire benefits that are created by its innovations. Then another barrier is we have fueling stations everywhere, so we have a perfect network. We don't have the same so far for electric vehicles. That is, the early adopters create a network externality by buying an electric vehicle. New charging stations will be built up, and other late adopters will also benefit from it. And we have the problem of the chicken and egg problem. That is because of transaction costs and problems in commitment. It's hard to coordinate the build-up of the charging network, because the charging network suppliers will ask first for the vehicles to be there, so that they have a high occupancy of the charging station, and the other way around, vice versa. Vehicle manufacturers often complain that there's not enough charging infrastructure, so we have another barrier when it comes to the complementary infrastructure. And the final barriers I want to mention, and the others I will skip for the sake of saving some time. On the consumer side, we have something that is called internalities. So that's kind of an analogy to externalities. The difference is you impose a cost to yourself. So while with externalities, you take a decision and you create costs that have to be borne by others. And with an internality, you act somehow irrational, not according to the model of rational choice, and you create a cost, but you have to bear it yourself. And there are several reasons why consumers act myopic. So there's a broad literature, though it's somehow ambiguous, I have to admit, that consumers don't fully value the future benefits of fuel efficiency, either a more efficient combustion engine vehicle or electric vehicle. So there's a large body finding that the discount rates are pretty high, or if you don't work with discount rates, that the present value of future fuel savings is lower in the decision or the present value of $1 saved in the future is discounted more and has a lower decision weight than the same dollar as purchase price now at the point in time when you decide on the vehicle. And this will lead also on the demand side for a lower demand for efficient vehicles and electric vehicles because it's generally undervalued, the future benefits in terms of energy cost. So we have supply side and demand side barriers that both work in the direction of lower adoption of EVs and lower adoption of efficiency technologies. I won't go through all those details to save some time. and I won't mention those either. So what is the consequence? The consequence is technology neutrality alone, carbon pricing alone, will not allow us to reach decarbonization in the most cost-effective way. What we need, and actually that's not really a surprise, is a policy mix because it's already used now. So some advocate for more technology neutrality, especially some liberal economists call for a total abandoning of the CO2 standards, and they also agree that maybe some specific policies in terms of support for infrastructure might be necessary, but for clearly less, and using carbon pricing as a mainstay of climate policy. But based on what I've said earlier, we would say that a well-balanced policy mix that addresses those particular barriers with well-tailored instruments, warrants, or guarantees a more efficient result in terms of the way to achieve our decarbonization goals. And what's the role of the CO2 standards in this policy mix? The first, they drive technological innovation, on the one hand to improve the efficiency of the drivetrain, of the combustion drivetrain, but that has mainly stopped because we have reached a level where more investments don't pay off anymore, but will innovate in terms of electric vehicles. And they offer direction and provide planning certainty and reduce investment risk, both for the manufacturers as well as the suppliers of complementary charging infrastructure. And also addressing the myopic consumer behavior, manufacturers are forced to supply more efficient vehicles benefiting the consumers. I think maybe for the sake of time, we don't go into the details, maybe briefly saying we are now close to the next step for the CO2 standards to take effect in the next year. So then we will go down from the current 180 grams to 94 grams of CO2 per vehicle kilometer. For most manufacturers, it won't be a problem. Some struggle, some call for a delay or for a weakening of the standards. And what I want to close the presentation, the last section, is some remarks on what are the options for the review. Should we weaken the standards, or should we do some other adjustments in order to provide more flexibility or make the standards more future-proof? So let's first look at one option that is discussed heavily in Germany, I've heard also in Italy, is that we should include the fuels into the regulation. That is, it is not the tailpipe CO2 that matters, but it also matters where the tailpipe CO2 comes from. If it's renewable from either biofuels or e-fuels, then it would be counted as zero-emission vehicle, the same as a battery electric vehicle. Is it a good idea, or should we stay with the current tailpipe approach? We argue that there's a strong rationale for staying with tailpipe CO2 standards. For one reason, as I've said, the technology spillovers for electric vehicles, because they are a relatively new technology, there are still many technological improvements that can be achieved, cost reductions that can be reaped. That's not the case for the combustion engine anymore. And if a combustion engine, though fueled with renewable fuels, is treated the same way as an EV, we don't have the same technology spillovers. Then we have the problem of consumer myopia. An combustion engine vehicle fueled with e-fuels or biofuels will still consume the same amount of fuels. That is, there's no saving, and the fuels are probably way more expensive. So we actually may worsen the problem of consumer myopia. And then the third reason is that if manufacturers rely on a strategy that they will bring into the market combustion engines that in the future should be fueled with those alternative renewable fuels, at some point, it may turn out that we don't have those fuels at scale, they're not available, then there will be high pressure to further relax the standards and undermining the environmental integrity. And the last reason is, so there will be scarce for the foreseeable future, and we have distortions between the sectors, so we don't have a level playing field. And if we include them in the CO2 standards, there will be a strong incentive to use those scarce renewable fuels in the road transport sector, though we need them more urgent in shipping and aviation because these sectors cannot be electrified in the foreseeable future, and we will have an inefficient allocation. So there's a strong rationale for supporting renewable fuels, but it should focus on those sectors where we don't have alternatives and only use byproducts. In the road transport sector. I won't talk about the LCAs.
Yes, unfortunately, we have just a couple of more minutes.
Yeah.
Because then we have the first panel. Thank you.
One minute on this slide at best. If manufacturers want more flexibility, we can do it like it is done in the US, for instance. We can introduce banking and borrowing. That is, manufacturers that might struggle to comply with their targets now can make that up in the future if they reduce their emissions more than is needed then in those future years, or the other way around. So early innovators and who bring EVs into the market early on can somehow relax their future obligations. Given the time, I won't go into the details, but it's important, though it allows more flexibility. There have to be safeguards that the overall environmental integrity is not undermined by using this mechanism. So it has to be made kind of future-proof and environmental integrity-proof. A brief outlook. As said, so far we have only tailpipe emissions. EVs are all treated the same. They're zero-emission vehicles. But we have a number of sustainability goals, and we have the problem of undervaluation of energy costs, those as a strong rationale for also including energy consumption in the future, to also set incentives for the EV fleet, not to become ever larger, but also to have an, in all means, sustainable fleet of electric vehicles with low energy consumption, because also electricity is scarce. And then I come to the final slide. I guess I won't summarize and repeat the things I mostly said before. Maybe I just want to close with a final remark on the last point. Any weakening of the standards now will be a problem not only for the fleet that's coming into the market for the next years, but this credibility problem will also harm the effectiveness of, on the one hand, the CO2 standards in the future. Once we open it up for watering down, then the credibility will suffer for the 2030 targets and also for the 35 targets. Manufacturers will be less inclined to obey to these targets, to comply, then again creating a vicious cycle to further water down in the future the stringency. And the same may also apply the detrimental signals sent out by a watering down of the standards for other carbon climate policies of the European Commission. So I want to finalize or close my remarks with a strong statement that it's important to maintain the overall stringency and integrity of the standards also in the future in the upcoming revision. And thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you. Thank you so much. This was very, very insightful. Thank you. Let me just now welcome the first panel for today, whose title is Technology Neutral vs. Technology Specific Regulations in the Perspective of the Economic Theory. The chair is, as mentioned before, Professor Matteo Di Castelnuovo, the director of our Master in Sustainability Management. Welcome, Matteo. We have as speakers Lucia Visconti Parisio, full professor of public economics at Università Milano Bicocca. Thank you. Alfredo Di Tillio, associate professor of economics, Bocconi University. Daniel Gross, director of the Institute for European Policymaking, Bocconi University. Enrico Giovannini, full professor in economics, Università Tor Vergata, and of course, former Italian transport minister. And connected, we have Daniel Sperling, founding director, ETS Davis, European Transport and Energy Research Center. So welcome you all, and enjoy the panel. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Valentina, and I'm cautious. Thank you also for the speakers who spoke before our panel, and cautious about the time. I'm very eager to continue the conversation with the coffee break. So we're aiming to maintain the agenda, so we're going to have a sort of reduced kind of slots, but I will make the most of the time we spend together. First thing first, allow me to thank also the people who made this sort of event possible, also my partner in crime, so Agora and ECCO, and one particular thank you to Massimiliano Bienati, when actually he approached me with this topic. It didn't take me long to kind of buy into it for three main reasons, basically. One, the topic in itself. As an economist who works on energy, it was really an easy sell, okay? You get all the ingredients, you get as you've seen from also Carl's presentation, externalities, market failures, technological adoption, also industrial strategies, all the ingredients which sort of help us, our economists, to keep a job in the medium run, without being jobless. The second reason that, as director of the Master in Sustainability Management, we very much embrace the issue of sustainability and mobility, which is why we introduced the course addressing specifically sustainable mobility, and it's our firm belief, as our dean mentioned earlier, that sort of sustainability is going to play a crucial role in the future leaders, and we play our bit. And we do believe actually that also within the automotive industry it will be very important to have people who have the necessary skills to support this transition. And last but not least, also the format that was actually presented to me by Max and Matteo and the colleagues of Agora in terms of making inclusive, okay? So we have something to discuss, which is the output they produced, and then all stakeholders. This is very much the kind of rationale of events you want to have universities, okay? You give voice to everybody, okay, different perspective, but you start from some kind of homework, okay? You start from the bottom line, and then you develop the arguments, and you let everybody express the opinion. These are the reasons why I was really happy to actually accept the challenge for hosting the event, the only event for this year for our master. Now, without further ado, cautious about the time, I would like now to turn to my speakers, which I would like to thank also for taking the time. Thank you, all of you, for being with us. And in order to be as fair as possible, I would like to use the order that you can see on the program. So I will start from Professor Parisio, okay, next to me. And I wanted to ask you, Lucia, so if we think about what actually Carl has been presented and also Max as well, so about the report they produced, I mean, does it make what can you make of this kind of report? Does it make any sense to discuss about these issues about technology neutrality versus technological specificity?
Okay, so thank you very much first for the invitation. Thank you, Matteo, ECCO, and Agora. Yes, I have a few comments about the previous presentations and the report. And technology neutrality looks to me like a myth. We used to teach students perfect competition, and perfect competition is able to deliver first best result, but soon then we teach students that we have a list of market failures. And technology neutrality needs perfect competition to work properly. So it's easy to understand that we need some policies that complements the functioning all markets that are related to the functioning of these very complex industries. And among the main problems, the main failures that I see that are related to the car industry is a problem of coordination. And this is something that is underlined even in the Draghi reports that has a specific chapter related to automotive. And coordination is very important in two dimensions. First, the vertical one, so the coordination along production stages. So if you want to fully achieve innovation, you have to have all stages that are ready to adopt changes. So all has to be fit to take all the innovation and make use, implement them. So this is the vertical point, but also we have an horizontal point, because the car industry is going to be related with other industries that was not like this before. For example, I'm thinking about the electricity industry. If we have electric vehicles, the two industries, production and the transportation and delivering of energy, and the car industry will come to be related. And then there is also an infrastructure problem of all the charging stations. And looking at this point with the lenses of a public economist, I see here a problem of universal service, where we put the charging stations. Of course, we will have some very profitable charging points in the streets of Milan, for example, but what about far places, small towns, where charging stations maybe they will not be so profitable? Who is obliged to put a charging station even in those places? This is a point that needs some sort of reasoning, and also a sort of central policy making. And then about the another comment just about the standards and the path to amend the standard itself. And so what I'm asking myself is how much the innovation is correlated with standards. So it's that we have innovation because we have the standards, or the innovation would have come at the same pace without standards just because it is profitable. And what I think is that, yes, we need a boost to incentive innovation. And without obligation, maybe we have no innovation and no green transition. So this is a point. And another point is how long the EU car industry will remain profitable, even without tariffs, import tariffs, and technological innovation, and these new regulation standards, and against the, for example, China competition. So maybe I have more questions than answers, but anyway.
Yeah, which is usually what would you expect from economists, I would say, shall say. So thank you very much, Lucia. Now I would like to move now to Alfredo. Alfredo, I was thinking that maybe this could be also a good opportunity to design new exercises for the course in microeconomics, especially when it comes to externalities. But so I wanted to...
That's why I'm here. Actually.
That's why you're here, exactly. So as a leading macroeconomist, what's your take on this, their approach and the topic they decided to address?
So, well, the topic is, of course, hugely important, massively important, so everybody should be interested. In fact, much of the problem is precisely that the public is not aware enough of the problem, because everybody talks about green, but then when it comes to buying a car, we do have the problems that the authors listed in their paper, namely information. This lack of stability of information of what is exactly that I am doing. So in fact, I think consumers don't really know their demand function for an electric car, precisely because they don't look ahead enough. They focus on price and the danger of being, an early adopter, and all problems of this generating from this new market. Okay, Having said that, of course, for consumers, electric cars and traditional cars are perfect substitutes. They both serve the purpose of going from point A to point B.
Yeah.
So the question is really how to keep quantity the same without, because we do want people to go around without polluting. Okay, so and for that, then coming to the firm side, as the authors highlighted, there's a coordination problem, there's an externality problem of the whole R&D, positive externality business. I buy into it a lot. It was a very convincing argument. Even though, you know, for me, I'm an economic theorist, so I'm completely orthogonal to, and not an insider to this world. But yet, even without seeing any formula in the paper, I was pretty convinced that that's a major issue on which governments should intervene. I also had the feeling at the end of reading a draft of the paper and listening to the presentation, that the issue is not even neutrality versus specificity, in the sense that we already have a winner. Okay, we will go electric. So I would go perhaps even a little beyond what Lucia said. It's not neutrality versus specificity, but rather what can we do to go faster towards to name the winner. Okay, so that's the feeling. Having said that, I also, you know, didn't find some arguments particularly convincing. I don't think there's a lemons problem to start with, but that's a minor issue. I mean, so going back to your question, yes, it's very much worth investigating
the topic.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alfredo. And why both of you were actually talking, so using sometimes the economist jargon or arguments, economic arguments. We don't know the demand function, and I could very much relate to what Carlo and Max were actually saying, the arguments, asymmetry, etc. But I can't help, speaking from my personal experience, that when I go to the sort of local dealer to maybe if I need to buy a car, I do fall into all those traps. So I don't think as an economist, when I'm actually buying for myself, I'm not able to step back and say, no, but look at the big picture. So I actually have the same, I'm a normal average consumer, okay? I'm not sort of an average economist, but actually an average citizen try to make a living, so to say. If I can move down, no, Daniel, another economist, so we're a group of economists. So Daniel, you've been looking also at the automotive industry extensively, also for your research, also more recently. What is your take on this report from these two think tanks?
Yeah, thanks. This is, of course, an important report on an important topic, as my colleagues here have already emphasized. But when I hear some of these things, I must say maybe I also shouldn't be allowed to buy a car on my own. Because nobody should be allowed to buy a car on his or her own. And that's one of my big problems with this argument that people don't know what they're doing, and therefore we need to tell them what technology. Okay, but who is we? Think tanks? Regulator? Do we know better the future? I think one should be extremely careful about that. It's the reason why we have mainly a market with all the imperfections. But there's of course imperfections in every market, but are they more serious for EVs than for ICEs? Why are people buying big expensive cars when there's a sticker price? Right, so, okay, coming back to the more specifically the issue here, one argument which is over and over emphasized is EVs are more expensive. Why? Does it have to be the case? We look at China, there it's no longer the case. Maybe our own producers have oligopoly which they're using to skim off European consumers. And we know, at least we have seen in China, and we know the cost curves for batteries, which is a typical solid state mass product, so we can be pretty confident that this cost curve will continue to decline. So the cost curve will decline. How quickly? Do we know better than the people and then the consumer? Right? My question marks. I think that has to be shown before we say we can't allow consumers to choose by themselves. But I repeat, the key thing is getting the cost down, and then all the rest will follow. And that is a problem which is also addressed, as you mentioned, in the Draghi report, because we stand between Scylla and Charybdis, right? Do we want to have cheap cars? Then at the present time, we have to import them. Yeah. Or do we want to save our automobile industry, which has just too high a cost, right? And I think the green objective should be more important, because I'm also convinced that our quote-unquote industry, and we'll come back what it means, our industry, will be able to adapt. I mean, many of our main producers are producing in China, are producing exactly the same model in China at half the cost. So it is possible to do it, right? They have to transfer some technologies. Yeah. I think that is what should be allowed. Now, the second point is, what is our industry? Industry owned by our present incumbents, or also factories owned by Chinese producers who then produce in Europe. And there again, the Draghi report in many discussions say, we cannot allow the Chinese to take over. Why not? If they have superior technology, and we have some factories in Europe which are no longer being used by our own producers, let them take it over and build cheaper EVs. So I think that is the way we should go. I find this part, I must say, much more important than general discussions about technological neutrality, which become a bit ideological. One really has to dive down and say, okay, what does it actually mean not to be technology neutral in this specific case? Here I would say that is something which is second order of magnitude compared to the key issue of driving down the cost curve, which the Chinese can help us do.
Yeah, very interesting. Thank you, Daniel. And actually, I couldn't stop thinking that when you were talking that one of the things I find most interesting about this whole topic is the fact that actually when it comes to the energy transition, I think that is actually very much what is happening in the automotive industry, which is forcing us to think deeply about the industrial strategy and the implication. That wasn't so much the case when it was about decarbonizing electricity and generation, but when it comes down to mobility, we have really to think hard enough to actually what is the implication for competitiveness and the auto industry. Now, Professor Giovannini, you did have also sort of privilege, if I may call it, also perspective of having the honor of being Minister of Transport Infrastructure. You did also commission a very important study on the topic of decarbonization. So who better than you, I would say, to shed some light and insight and comment on what on this particular topic?
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to everybody, and thank you for inviting me. I could just make a comment on the report saying I agree, period. Okay. So this would save a lot of time. But I think that all the arguments that are discussed in the report are the right ones. The answers are the right ones to, let's say, using the best knowledge we have today with all the problems, all the difficulties. But I was one of those who had to decide in 2022 what to do with the regulation on cars on 2035. But we also agreed on the other regulations on maritime, on air transport, and so on and so forth. And I will come back here on the heavy commercial vehicles that nobody is talking about, but is very closely linked to what we are discussing today. So the report that you were referring to was one of the very few that took the entire spectrum of automotive that starts from motorcycles to very heavy commercial vehicles. I have to say that I was convinced that putting a ban at 2035 was the right thing, also because it's the full change of existing cars. So if we want to postpone it, we should postpone it by 8 years or so, which is the average cycle of reshuffling of our stocks. But beside that, I think that there are 4 points I would like to make very quickly. First, the current discussion, especially in Italy, is completely unrational, not rational. It's unbelievable the way in which we are discussing this very serious and complex issue. Why is that? I think that is because, contrary to what economists normally do, we do not focus on the real accounts of pros and cons, profits, costs, and so on. But I also think that even in the report, we are not getting the figures right, because we are still talking about CO2 emissions. And it looks like this is a green issue. It's about us. If we focus on pollution, which is about people, we would discover that we have 300,000 premature deaths in Europe every single year. Not all due to cars, of course. 1/3 is about transport. So if you multiply this, for Italy is around 50,000. If you multiply this times the years between now and 2035, you have about 200,000 people who have to die. Why? Or because we don't get any brilliant idea on how to manage possible 60,000 unemployed people, or 13 according to other estimates. In other words, if we put the accounts in the right way, we see the cost of losing millions for Europe, consumers, people who save money, who spend money, citizens, and so on, which is a huge number, by the way. Is exactly, compared to population, exactly the same number that China has. China has 1.1 premature deaths every year, and they have almost 3 times our population. So what we are discussing here is not only to make the car production profitable, is not only to make people happy when they drive a car and so on, but is to save lives. And this is completely out of the debate. Second, very quickly, market failure, for sure. The paper discussed this. Maybe it doesn't underline enough that young people preferences for cars are going down very quickly. Almost 10% of 18 years old people in Europe, but also in US and so on, don't want to have a car. Maybe half of them, maybe they want to have a car if it is clean. Is this something that we should take into account? Because we take preferences in all economic models as a given, which are not, as we know very well. But anyway, is this something that we should put in our way of discussing? And very last point, as I was said before, technology is changing very quickly. It's not only about cars, but it's also about heavy vehicles and so on and so forth. And I remember when we designed the National Plan for Recovery and Resilience, where we were obliged by the Commission, in the name of technological neutrality, to put money to establish 40 recharge stations for hydrogen. Because at the time, the heavy vehicles manufacturers were split between electric and hydrogen. It looks to me, but I'm just asking the experts, that 2 years later, again, electric is the winner. So that money is going to be lost, which is not a big amount of money, but is an example of having a technological neutrality, and then you say, okay, maybe I could have used that money in a different way. And so I see these all linked. Technology is changing very, very quickly, so being adaptive is very important, but we saw that China, that is now dominating the market, I don't think that they know what technological neutrality is. Really, I don't think, as they don't have the word accountability, let's say, they don't have the word of technological neutrality. So I think that if we have to choose, I would go more for technological multiplicity, which is not neutrality. And just to explain the difference, in Davos, all the ministers of transports were, some ministers of transports were there. The heads of maritime companies said, okay, in your ports, we want to have current, very polluting stuff, then liquid gas, then ammonia, then hydrogen, and of course we want to attach our ships with the electricity. And you have to pay, and then we will choose the technology. Should I, let's say, destroy our cities and our ports just to be technologically neutral? It doesn't work. It cannot work. So I think that I made my point.
Wow. Thank you very much. And actually, about what you just said also in terms of the long-term challenge saving lives, if I may, it seems there is a general perception of how bad climate change is upon us, etc. But what most people don't know is how much transport is contributing to this problem. So that actually, that if you look at all developed economies, starting from Europe, transport is the largest source of emissions. Is over a quarter of the emissions are coming from transport. Within that, and rising because of mobility and globalization, and within that, it is actually road transport which is contributing the most. This is not on a global scale. On a global scale, it is not transport, it is actually still the electricity production. But on a regional level, the most advanced economies is transport. It is in Europe, it is in the UK, which used to be part of Europe, and it's also the case in the US, which is why it also makes me particularly sort of also grateful that today we have with us, although connected, Professor Daniel Sperling, which I would like to thank also for being patient and being connected and for being very early in the day where he's connecting from. So Professor Sperling is the American founding director of the Institute of Transportation Studies at University of California, Davis. He's Professor of Civil Environmental Engineering. And he has a tremendous experience when it comes to sustainable transport. He's been a leading international expert on transportation, technology assessment, energy, and environmental aspects. So I think, once again, we have somebody who knows a great deal about this subject. So, Professor Sperling, thank you for being connected with us this early in the morning. And can we ask you to give your take on this very important topic?
Well, thank you. Thank you very, very much. I really am sad not to be there. In fact, I'm going to be in Milan in a couple weeks. I'm going to Alba to the White Truffle Festival. Oh. So I love your area.
I'm in. Okay.
Okay, so one addition to my background is I'm an ex-regulator. So I held the automotive engineering board seat on the California Air Resources Board for
16 years until last year. So I understand the details of regulation. Okay, so let me, there's so much I could respond to, and I'd love to. I've written actually many books and hundreds of papers on these topics. So this is, I am really very sad not to be there because this is what really gets me excited. I do want to start off by saying that the paper by Carlo and his colleagues, I think, is a brilliant paper. It's very sophisticated treatment of the issue of regulatory approaches. Now, one other point I want to make before I jump in is that I'm not an economist. I actually am a senior professor of civil engineering and environmental science and policy, but I know economics very well, and I actually would endorse the idea that we should be harnessing market forces as principal top strategy. But as Carlo and the paper and some others have very clearly articulated, there are major shortcomings and imperfections that really undermine the use of pure market instruments. So where I think the world is going with let me start bigger. There were so many great comments here. Let me start out by acknowledging a few things, a few preconditions for this whole debate. And that is, as we've heard, the climate challenge. I think everyone is convinced that we really need to do something aggressive about reducing greenhouse gases. Air pollution, as was just pointed out, is still a major problem. And a third kind of precondition to this discussion is that there is a technology consensus, a consensus that electric vehicle technology really is and will be the dominant technology for the automotive industry. And actually not just for light duty, but for also big trucks as well. And there's a lot of questions exactly how this is going to play out in some regions, but it's widely accepted, even by the auto industry globally, that electric vehicle technology is where they need to be. And it's really just a question of timing. And there is a question that at the margin, there could be some other issues, and I'll get into that in a moment, because that's the only place I possibly disagree with that paper just a little bit, is the issue about getting to 100% EVs in 2035. So let me also just summarize. I think the issues that we're discussing here, I see three major issues at the high level. I'm going to delve into the details of regulatory approaches in a moment. But I think just to summarize, kind of to be a rapporteur of sorts for this discussion, the three big issues are consumer choice, trade issues and industrial policy as a second one, and regulatory policy design. Let me get into the regulatory policy design a little bit, partly by telling what California is doing. So it was noted that I started a research center for my institute in Europe, in Paris, headed up by an Italian, by the way, Pier Paolo Cazzola. And the reason we did that is because California is pretty much on the same path as Europe in terms of its climate strategies and goals. So in California, we have a requirement of net zero carbon, net zero GHG by 2045. We have a cap and trade system that's similar to the ETS in Europe. And we have a whole slew of other policies. In fact, I always thought we had the most onerous set of regulations in the world until I came to understand how the European Commission works. But having said that, that was just half a joke. I want to say that what California has done specifically with vehicles is we have a requirement that by 2035, 100% of all vehicle sales must be zero emission, just like what Europe is doing. And we also actually have, it was just mentioned about trucks, we also have a mandate that we get to 1 trucks by 2040. Now, in terms of the regulations, okay, a little more detail on California. What we do, even though it's a mandate for zero emission vehicles, it's not really exactly. So within that 100%, 20% can be plug-in hybrid vehicles, which haven't been discussed yet, but is a big issue in Europe. So 20% of the 100% can be plug-in hybrids, but it does not allow any combustion. So fuels, no hydrogen combustion is allowed, although hydrogen fuel is allowed. And I would point out, with respect to the last speaker, is that we have, in California, we have focused on hydrogen vehicles as well. And I would note that BMW and Toyota and Hyundai are also all have major fuel cell vehicle, hydrogen fuel cell vehicle programs. Okay, so, so California is basically on the same path. Few details are a little different. So just to be concise here, I want to make a few points. And one is that very aggressive standards, like the 2035 standards for EVs, I think from almost any perspective makes sense. We might, when we get to 2035, near 2035, maybe we want to make some adjustments, loosen it up. But basically, I think it's widely accepted. This is a good approach. And that's because EV technology, EVs are not just a good technology for carbon reduction and air pollution, but they're also a good economic strategy. Within a few years, electric vehicles should have a lower total cost of ownership than comparable combustion engine vehicles, and even the price of new vehicles will be approaching combustion vehicles in a number of years. So EVs are a good thing, not just for the environment and climate and Earth, but also for consumers and the economy. Now, having said all that, there are some issues that come up that cause us to think about some of the details of these regulations and policies a little more. So first of all, this idea of technology neutrality versus technology specific. With electric vehicles, I think it's gotten to the point where we know EVs are the future and they are going to be the dominant technology. And so therefore, we don't really need technology neutrality at this point because we need all the complementary policies to make it ease the transition. But I will say one improvement that the European standards could have is what Carlo referred to as banking and borrowing. I call it more generally tradable credits. And the European standards kind of address it because they allow pooling, where a company can pool with Tesla, for instance, to meet the requirements. But it's a kind of a structured way. A more elegant economic approach would be just to allow trading of credits between the companies, and that would allow more efficiency. Okay, so just some last points. I know I've been taking some time here. Is that, okay, the one place I'm not sure I agree with Carlo and his presentation and the paper is about e-fuels. And the reason is about political acceptability. If we adopt these aggressive as we adopt these aggressive standards for 2035, there's always going to be pushback, political pushback, as we've heard from some of the speakers already. So one way of undermining that political opposition is to provide a little bit more choice. So plug-in hybrids is part of giving consumers more choice and industry more choice. E-fuels, I think, also gives a little bit of choice. And I'm not worried about e-fuels allowing it to be part of the discussion, because they're always going to be much more expensive than electric vehicles and fossil fuels, because the e-fuels are made from electricity. So, you know, made with electricity. And so it's always going to be more expensive. So it's hard to believe that it'll be will ever be anything more than just a niche fuel. So I'm okay allowing e-fuels in a little bit for political reasons. The other comment that was made is the need for some efficiency approach. So California suffers from the same criticism. So I voted on it. I played a big role in it. We said all electric vehicles are equal, but they're not. Some of them are huge, with huge batteries. They require large amounts of critical materials, which is another issue we haven't gotten to here. And they require tremendous amounts of more electricity. So we need to refine this regulatory approach to take into account efficiency, and efficiency defined broadly. And it's not purely technical efficiency, not purely economic efficiency, but it's basically kilowatt hours per kilometer. And how do you get that? How do you reduce that? So I think that's pretty much everything I wanted. That's the short version. I could talk about the Chinese EV industry and industrial policy, and those are all important issues. But I think we're on the right path. I think the overarching approach that we've talked about here about having, you know, figuring out how to make electric vehicles, how to accelerate electric vehicles is correct. There's minor issues we can talk about in terms of banking and borrowing and combustion and e-fuels, but basically I think we're all agreed on the path, and we ought to be working on the details of the policies to make sure that this path forward is the most efficient path, the most acceptable path, and the least disruptive. And I just have to say one last comment. Here I'm in the United States. So I say I'm from California, the nation state of California. We like to say we're the 5th largest economy in the world. But, you know, in the United States, we have, at the national level, we have much weaker, much poorer policy than either EU or California. And one of the problems is regulatory certainty. We have new administrations every 4 years, and they seem to be flip-flopping. And that creates major challenges for industry in terms of making the investments, the certainty of their investments. But overall, thank you very much. I'm happy to participate further in this discussion and here and afterward. And thank Christian Hochfeld, who I've known a long time. I really admire him and Agora. So this has been a great pleasure. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much for your insights. And if I may, one very short comment. You said that this is we're on the right path, and that's for me the definition of ending on a positive note, the discussion. So thank you for serving that. And also I'll go out on the limb and say, I have my dean in front of me, that since you go to Alba, and we are already jealous about this, but please consider yourself formally invited to, since you were not with us over lunch, to come over in Milan and continue the discussion with myself and my colleagues here sitting next to me and Enzo. So if you can stop in Milan, we'll be delighted to spend some time with you. Thank you very much also for taking the time. And thank you also to all my panelists. And now 2 of them had unfortunately to leave, but allow me to thank them. So Professor Giovannini, Professor Gross, Professor Di Tiglio, and Professor Parisio. Thank you very much, and let's continue the discussion on the lunch break, and above all, after the coffee break. And after the coffee break, very interesting conversation. We have 10 minutes coffee break, so you have to drink very quickly, okay? It's an
exactly.
back now. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you.